The other thing is that philosophers are, always saying to themselves, how could this possibly be so? How could there be such a thing as value? For instance. And, but the first thing you had to do was to try and get involved in the question so that you could see that there was a real puzzle here. It was only when I began to see that there could be puzzles that philosophy started making sense to me.
Welcome everyone to today's interview, where we are very pleased to welcome Professor Jonathan Dancy. He is currently a professor of philosophy at University of Texas at Austin and research professor at the University of Reading in England. His books include Moral Reasons, Ethics Without Principles, Practical Shape, A Theory of Practical Reasoning. His new book, now released, called Practical Thought, Essays on Reasons, Intuition, and Action, which is a collection of some of his essays, as well as he has a couple other books as well, and numerous published articles. Feel free to add anything, but with that, welcome and thanks so much for being here, Professor Dancy.
Not at all. I hope it's going to be a pleasure.
Awesome. So, actually, I wanted to start off on perhaps what you're most well known for, some of your contributions and defenses of moral particularism, and maybe for those who are a bit less familiar with what this is, could you sort of briefly describe the view or the family of views and some of the basic motivations in favor of it?
So particularism is the view that actions are made right or wrong by features of the situation in which they're done. And that moral principles of any recognizable sort don't add anything to that process. It's as if one said, in these circumstances, it would be wrong to act in a certain way, and therefore it's always the case that in these circumstances it would be wrong to act if such a situation could recur. So the best a principle can do is to sort of generalize from a given case, rather than to be something about which you, or from which you argue to the nature of the case. And that's really just because of supervenience. Once you've got an action that is wrong, and made wrong however it's made wrong, then we know that any other action that's utterly indistinguishable from this one will also be wrong. But that, if you like, is a fact that cuts no ice, because as we know in advance, really, there can never be a second action utterly indistinguishable from the first one. One difference between them would be, of the second one, that one such action had occurred before. That wouldn't be true of the first one. So really we have to look at the ways in which the features that make actions wrong actually go about doing that. And this sharpens and focuses one's attention on the ways in which reasons function, in which other things that aren't reasons but are still relevant to how one ought to behave, and I have a whole pack of distinctions about that, combined to make this action wrong. And if one then said, sort of made a principle out of that, the principle would be one that had no teeth, because there could never be a second action utterly indistinguishable from the first. How about that as a first shot?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's really good. So if Avi's here, I think you can ask. You had a couple questions you wanted to ask.
So the first question I had is, when we talk about your moral particularism, do you take it to be that there are no generalizable moral principles at all? and that all norms are particular? Or do you take the view that there are some generalizable moral principles, but there are at least some norms that are just particular? It sounds like you're taking the former based on the way you've said things previously, but maybe I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I don't care whether there might or might not be some counterexample free universal truths of the sort you're looking for. There just might be some, but the nature of ethical thought does not require that there should be some. And I've yet to find any that look at all promising as examples. The best you can get is ones that contain words like enough. If you hit someone hard enough. Or, beyond that, my general argument is not, I don't feel the need to defeat each moral principle case by case, as it were. It's the, if you like, the logical structure of the thought or of the situation that goes to make it the case that this action is wrong, contains wrong-making features, a whole pack of supporting troops, and then many indifferent considerations. So, I'm rambling a bit here, but I'm thinking that I don't have to deny as a particularist that there might be some exceptionless, universally quantified statements that have, if you like, are of the if-then form and have non-moral left-hand sides and moral right-hand sides. I just maintain that, well, I've yet to see any that look convincing, that there's absolutely no need for them, that if there were things of this form, moral thought would be utterly unlike any other sort of thought, which seems to me deeply improbable. It's a kind of common sense view, really, according to me.
Okay. I'd like to no, I can hear you. I'd like to offer a bit of a thought experiment about an epistemic issue that I've thought of regarding moral particularism versus moral generalism, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And so here's the question. So let's say we have a hypothetical Holocaust where many millions and millions of people are being tortured to death. And let's just stipulate that this type of Holocaust is of the sort such that the following don't apply. So, number one, this Holocaust does not generate any utility. So it does not improve any well-being. It does not prevent any suffering. So we get that principle. We wand that principle away for whatever that principle may have. Number two, it does not instantiate any deontic duties, however we define them. It does not prevent any deontic rights violations, however those are defined. It doesn't bring any virtues into the world. It doesn't prevent any vices into the world, however we define those. So we're just dealing with a type of Holocaust that is of the subset of possible Holocausts that don't do any of those things, right? So that's the type of
no possible redeeming features.
Yeah, or at least no possible redeeming features of any of the subscribers of classical utilitarian or preference utilitarianism or deontology or virtue ethics, right?
Right.
Yeah. We could broaden that as well, of course, if there's some more fringe normative theories. But yeah. Now the question. So we can imagine of this subset of Holocausts, we can imagine that there are a virtually infinite ways of permutating this Holocaust, such that it could be done in many, many different ways. So, for example, you could change the order by which you can torture different individuals before you kill them. If you're killing them with different instruments or torturing with different instruments, you could change that order. You can permutate it. You could change up the instruments just a slight bit or more. There's many different infinite permutations that you can do to have this sort of Holocaust while still having those that non-redeeming feature clause on the generalist normative theories. You're with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
mhm.
I take it to be that a particularist would want to say, if asked, is this so the question is going to be, are all of these permutations of this Holocaust subset, of the no redeeming features Holocaust subset, are all of these permutations wrong on your view? And do you have a high credence that they're wrong on your view? And I take it to be that particularists are going to want to answer that yes, all of the permutations of this sort of Holocaust are wrong on my view. And B, yes, I have a high credence that they're wrong on my view. Are we in agreement so far?
All right. Yeah.
Okay. Now the question is, how is it that a particularist gets to that view, the view that A, in the conjunction of A, all permutations of this Holocaust are wrong on my view, and B, I have a high credence that all permutations of this Holocaust are wrong on my view. And the reason I say this is because if one is a generalist, for example, if one is a moral generalist, it's trivial. They can appeal to some principle. They can say, oh, well, the most trivial example would be like, oh, well, on principle, because the principle is the making feature of what is wrong, I could just say all examples of the no redeeming Holocaust, the no redeeming features Holocaust are wrong. And so since I don't have to do any sort of work about all the different permutations, I don't have to do any induction, I don't have to do anything like that. I could just say, oh, well, it's all just trivially subsumed under the principle. Now, for the particularists, there seem to be different strategies. You can try induction, you can try some sort of like different, but the question here is just going to be, for the particularist, how did they get to a high credence that all of these particular examples are going to be wrong on their view? Is it an induction? If so, we can talk about the different inductive strategies. Is it a family resemblance type of strategy? So that's the general type of question that I'll ask. And there's different strategies that I've seen particularists try, and I'm curious to which one you would try.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, what I would say is that the first situation you described is one where everything is terribly bad and there's absolutely no redeeming features.
Well, by non-redeeming features, we just mean that they don't have redeeming features with respect to generalist normative ethics, like You
don't need to bring in any ism here. It's just the case that you've explicitly ruled out all the possible redeeming features and mentioned very many extremely bad aspects.
Well,
I would say in such a case, there isn't any other possibility but that the action should be wrong. But that's because you've so set it up that the possibility of things on the other side has been ruled out in advance, which I thought is what we call a Pyrrhic victory.
Well, here's the thing. When you say that there's no redeeming features, I'm just using that as a clause to say that there's no, that it doesn't comport with any of the following generalist normative theories, right? Deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics. But what I don't understand...
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but what I'm having trouble understanding is for the particularist, how they get to the view that it's no redeeming features on their view. Like, I understand how, like, the generalist view gets to saying it's no redeeming features, but if a particularist is given this case where they're just told that it doesn't comport with these normative principles, how are they getting to the view that all possible permutations don't have any redeeming features if they're rejecting these principles in the first place?
Well, the notion of a redeeming feature is not one that requires the possibility of principles.
Well, I understand
a redeeming
that.
Feature, yeah, so we have it. There are many bad things that are involved in the the scenarios you're imagining. And though it is possible for such bad things to be the case, while still we should go ahead and do it, there would have to be some explanation of why we should. That's to say, some reasons on the other side. Now, you've really explicitly excluded the possibility of reasons on the other side, and then asked me to say, whether such an action could be other than right, and if so, why isn't that, if you like, opening the door to some form of generalism because it's a general remark? Now, I'm still thinking this is a Pyrrhic victory. In a sense, all you've done is to say that if all the relevant considerations are on one side and none are on the other, won't it be the case that always in that sort of circumstance, one should, whatever it is, which is hard to deny, but doesn't seem to me to be even the slightest argument in favor of generalism.
Well, the issue here is that when you say I've excluded all the redeeming features, that's the question at hand. I don't understand how a particularist even says that, because all I've done is exclude the redeeming features on the three different generalist normative theories.
Right.
Now,
it's not theories that make features redeeming. A redeeming feature is a feature that is some reason to do an action which is overall wrong. Now, in this particular case, there are no such reasons, in the sort of case you're citing, there are no such considerations that are reasons to do the action. You went through a long list of, there are no things of this sort, no things of that sort, no things of the other sort. It seems to me it's nothing to do with the debate between particularism and generalism, whether in a case where everything is disastrous and there's no redeeming feature, we ought to hold off or whatever it is.
I take it to be that the normative theories are saying that these things are wrong in virtue of, not comporting with this theory, like as a generalist, right? And
Okay.
for particularists would say that they're not wrong. I'm just
No, things are not wrong in virtue of not comporting with generalism.
No. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if someone is a generalist and they have a normative theory, they'll say something is wrong in virtue of not comporting with that normative theory, right? We agree on that, presumably.
I don't really. I'm not convinced that features are wrong because they don't comport with a theory. Features are wrong. Supposing an action is made wrong by the damage it does. Is it therefore wrong because it's not conforming with a theory that says you should always, some theory anyway. No, it's wrong because of the damage it does. And the theorists try to give an account of that.
They're giving an account of what the damage is.
No, of how it is that the damage can go to make an action wrong.
Okay.
One lot says.
I don't want to take up most of your time. If possible, I'd like to, because I know this is an AMA, I don't want to clog all the time. I'd like, if there's any way we can talk about this further at a later time, I would like to understand it, because what my hang up is here is just that what I'm having trouble understanding is how I'm still having trouble understanding how the particularist looks at this these permutations and says, in the first place, there's no redeeming features. I don't understand how a particularist, given those set of statements about those permutations, can come to a high credence that it is the case that there's no possible redeeming features. But that's that. But if it's up to you. If you, we can talk after this, because I don't want to hog your time.
That's a slightly different question. The question you're asking now is, can a particularist make sense of the idea of a reason? A redeeming feature is a consideration which is some reason to do an action which is nonetheless wrong, or not to do an action. No, that's what it is. To do an act which is nonetheless wrong. Now, can a particularist make sense of that? Well, my answer to that question is yeah. particularists are particularly keen on the ways in which reasons behave. And this is an idea of a consideration that is a reason not to do an action, which we still have more reason to do than not to do.
Sure. Yeah, I should have said on the pro toto. Yeah, yeah, of course. So my question, the specific hang up I'm having is within that subset of Holocaust. I don't understand how a particularist would say that there is that there isn't a single instance of those Holocaust such that there isn't redeeming features such that on the pro toto we ought not do them for all of those cases, or we ought to do them for any of those cases. That's the hang up I'm having, and I don't want to hog your time. So if possible, I'd like to continue. But that's
okay. At the moment, I've done my best. I feel that where I think the debate is located is slightly different from the place where you think it is. But that is often the case in such debates.
Okay. I mean, I'd like to, if possible, I'd like to move on, and then if there's more time at the end, or at another time, I'd like to then clear up so we can talk on the same page.
Fine.
Okay.
Well, I'm not in charge of this.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Alvi. We'll see. I actually had so I think I sort of understand what you're saying on that, Professor Dancy. Because I had this question that is sort of similar in a way, right? Because we could think that there's some proposed principle that included things that, in that case, there was things that counted very much against an action, but you could think of one that included reasons which count very much in favor of it, and you could include a sort of "that's all" clause, right? There's nothing further that counts against it, or something like that. What you have is a sort of principle, right? You might think that it applies in full generality. And actually, it seems I don't see a reason why the particularists would deny the truth of such a principle, right? I mean, it's perfectly sensible, but it's not that those sorts of principles are necessary or the key consideration in moral action and so forth. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I mean, I think such cases are rare. Then their nature should not really be allowed to determine the nature of moral thought and judgment in ordinary life.
Right, and a lot of the thought is that there's a lot being hidden in that no further reasons clause, right? I mean, in the particular case, what you're doing is figuring out whether there are such reasons, right, and finding the balance of the reasons and so on.
That's right. I mean, the particularist's view is that generalizations about the way in which reasons behave are not among, if you like, the stuff doing the work on the ground. The work on the ground is done by features that are in that context, counting as reasons for or against, or disablers, or attenuators, or intensifiers, or whatever, all that stuff. And generalizations about that are not part of what make actions right or wrong.
Right. Yes.
They specify conditions which, had things been different, would have prevented the things that make it right from making it right.
Right. And you said something to this in part of your response to Avi, that and the generalists can say something similar, right? It's not it's being a violation of the theory, which or the normative theory, or the whatever abstraction we have that makes it wrong. It's the particular features of the world, right? It's the wrong making features and so forth that make it wrong. I remember this seemed like the sort of response that someone might have to maybe you're familiar with like Michael Stalker's paper on I think it's Michael Stalker on the schizophrenia of modern moral theories.
Yeah.
It's called something like that.
Long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael and I spoke a lot at one point. So yes, there's a consonance between us. So that's irrelevant gossip, nonetheless.
All right.
I mean that I can't extract more from that than basically because I've forgotten the details.
We'll move on to some of the other questions I had, and maybe we can come back to some of the stuff on particularism. So I was wondering if you really separate the various different sorts of reasons, like moral, prudential, epistemic, and maybe further, I don't know. Or are they really fundamentally different sorts of things, or can they be subsumed in some sense under this general category of a reason? Right? It's just the difference is what they're reasons for, be it like additional beliefs or actions and so on. Do you have a view on that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, look, there are ordinary reasons and then there are moral reasons. There are plenty of ordinary reasons that don't go to make actions right or wrong. They go to make them worth doing or unwise or goodness knows what. But some reasons sort of operate by getting into the wrong-making or right-making business. And it may not be the very same consideration that does that in one case will do it in other cases, but sort of in cases where moral issues arise, it may be ordinary considerations that are getting in there, fighting away. But what they're after in this case is right-making and wrong-making. So there's reasons to do the action, which aren't themselves reasons that make the action right or morally wrong. And then there are the reasons to do it that, in addition to being reasons to do it, go to make the reason that the action morally right or one that you ought to do. So there's this sort of focus, there's moral, the ought, right, wrong, mustn't. Those deontic categories are ones that are involved in moral choice. But the considerations that bring them into play are perfectly ordinary considerations, like how much money you have or who owns this thing. Does that make any sense?
Right. So,
so I'm thinking that I'm a variablist about the ways in which reasons contribute to the overall question of what choice to make in a given situation.
Be that like action or like belief or like
action, belief, yep, emotion.
Right.
But I also think, for instance, that a consideration that makes one action amusing might, on another occasion, make an action definitely not amusing.
Right.
Now, that isn't anything to do with the deontic, I don't think. Just in aesthetics, a feature that makes one object aesthetically admirable can itself make another object aesthetically the worse because of the other features present in the two cases. Now, here again, we're not dealing with oughts, rights, wrongs, or anything, musts, shoulds, all that. But we are dealing with sort of the variability of evaluative judgment. But if you sort of allow a particularist picture of aesthetic judgment, or sort of in the non-deontic area, and then say yes, but when we get to musts and oughts and shoulds and things, we're going to need sort of some heavier weight machinery than just the sorts of reasons involved in the decisions whether a painting is beautiful or a landscape attractive or anything like that. We're going to need more for the musts and the mustn'ts and the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and the right and the wrong. I have yet to see an argument that looks capable of persuading me that there should be that sort of difference.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, what do you think about the sort of response that says like, well, in both these cases you have, I don't know, these features counting in favor of something. There's like reasons to have a particular response, belief, and so on. Why should those not be sufficient to generate some sort of ought, right?
Well,
Even
they
in a
can,
non-moral
indeed.
case.
Well, I mean, there are non-moral oughts, of course.
Right.
But I mean, those features are sufficient to generate an ought on occasions. But I don't see any reason why we should suppose that in order to do so, we've got to wheel in something radically different from what we had already on the table, namely principles.
Right. But then you would agree then we have oughts kind of maybe all over the place insofar as we're having these reasons counting for and against particular things, be it emotions, actions, beliefs, and so on. And there's, in that sense, nothing special about the action case, except that there's this whole maybe additional moral baggage that goes along with them.
The deontic properties are, very interesting because they look as if they might be metaphysically different from the non-deontic properties.
Right. I guess maybe sorry, go ahead.
That seemed to me yet to make it likely the way to explain it is that in the deontic case, we've got not only ordinary reasons functioning, but principles in addition.
Right. Yeah, I think I probably share your view with respect to needing these principles in addition in the deontic case. It seems to be more that principles, so to speak, come about as a sort of useful generalization, maybe, and if we recognize them as such, don't take them as a sort of absolute.
That's fine.
Right. Then there's no. Of course, the particulars can accept that. There's sort of a useful guide. Maybe.
Yeah. I know. These are the things you teach your children. It's got to be possible to do that. If you put your child in a good place to make sensible moral judgments, then you're failing in your duty as a parent, as it were. I want to say that stuff. In a way, the question is something like this. If you say, look, you were lying, you knew you were lying, you did it purely in order to serve yourself, it had very unfortunate effects on her, then, and all such actions are wrong. It seems to me the last bit kind of sort of is rendered redundant by the first part. What makes the action despicable is not that all such actions are wrong.
Yeah. I was wondering how you would deal with the case where such a person doesn't take those as reasons against the action, right? Maybe we're talking about the moral.
I can't. I don't have a story about that, and I don't think I need one. Nobody said that any sensible person who opens their eyes will recognize the more obvious reasons before them.
But you don't want to say that they are reasons before them, even if they don't recognize them. It's not like the reasons are determined. Because some people will say that the reasons are in some sense determined by their commitments and beliefs and so forth. That's the reason.
Yeah, but I'm not. Right, but I'm a look. Well, I don't know what else you know about my work, but I'm definitely a realist about all these things.
Right.
But the reasons for which people act, according to me, the reasons for which people act are not their own beliefs and desires or commitments or other such aspects of themselves. Well, at least not normally.
Yeah, right. And that's something, because maybe actually there's a paper that you wrote that I've had a couple of questions on, and it's sort of related to this. I think it's from 2014. It's called "Acting in Ignorance," and
Yeah.
in that paper you explore the apparently uncommon view that someone's reason for acting might be some belief they have, and that belief might not be true. And as I understood it, the conclusion, or at least the conclusion regarding this, what you call the non-factive view, is that the reason is the belief, them believing such is the reason for them doing such and so, but that the belief is often reported in, ways that's like stating as truth conditions, or that commit the reporter to certain facts and so forth, but need not do so. Really, is that right? Is it the belief that really is the reason in that case?
No. According to me, the reason for which they act is the thing they believe, not their believing it or that they believe it.
Right.
Look, there's a bit of history in this. When I sort of grew up in the subject of this in the 70s and 80s, everyone accepted Donald Davidson's argument that motivating reasons, as we called them, are psychological states of the agent. They are not facts or anything like that. Normative reasons, which are good reasons to do things, are not facts about the agent, in the sense of what the agent believes or desires, or the agent's believings and desirings, but real matters of fact. What I argued in my book, Practical Reality, was that most of the reasons there are for us to act are not states of ourselves. So according to Davidson, it's impossible to act for such reasons. And this was, I think, taken quite seriously as an argument. It was effective in the community. Davison supposed that a motivating reason had to be some sort of cause of your acting. And I maintained that the reason for which you act is taken by you as a reason so to act, i.e., you act in the light of that fact as a reason. It isn't you act in the light of some belief of yours. Your reason is not that I believe this, it's what I believe, which is quite different.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe I misunderstood the conclusions exactly you were drawing there. And I do find that, to be honest, I find that view, that Davidsonian view, kind of appealing, because how exactly were you handling the case where you are acting for a reason? It's just that the thing that it is that is the reason doesn't obtain, right?
No, it isn't a reason. Well, you mean it's not so, or it is so, but it's not a reason so to act?
But so it isn't a reason to act in that case?
Well, look, there are two possibilities. Supposing I took my granddaughters out for a bit of horse riding this afternoon for the reason that they would enjoy it. That was the reason for trying to do it. Now, that they would enjoy it is not a fact about me. But nonetheless, it's the fact that was my reason for doing it. I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't believed that to be so, but that doesn't show that my believing to be so was the reason why I did it, the reason for which I did it. So for me, when I go about considering how to act, I consider the reasons for acting in this way and that, or that. And very few of those considerations are facts about me.
Right. And
Whereas
sorry, go ahead.
Whereas for Davison, it seemed as if all of them had to be facts about me, because my motivating reasons were all my own psychological states.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe one of the you consider a few cases, and one we might ask about the person who's leaving to catch a train or something.
And stuff. Yep.
And I don't know. Suppose the train isn't in fact running today, and so when they said I'm leaving to catch because the train is going to be here or something like that, in a sense, their reason they're providing is false. Their belief, their thing they take to be the case, that's the reason for their action is not actually the case. What's the diagnosis here? Is it that they did have a reason? It's somehow, if the reason in the state of affairs is not there, or they don't have a reason.
Well, once I have occasionally said they did it for a reason that was no reason. Or, there are two possibilities. One, the thing was so, but wasn't the reason they took it to be. And the other is, it wasn't even so. Now, I think that acted for the reason that ushers in an intentional context. So it's possible to act for the reason that P, when P is not the case. That P may be no reason to act, but I can act for the reason that P. That's my reason. So it's an intentional context. Nothing follows about the ontology of motivating reasons from the nature of these contexts.
Okay, yeah, it's just that I guess if it's an intentional context, is it not the belief? Because if in the good case where the train is there, so to speak, and we want to say that it is that sort of state of affairs, that the actual train being there and so on, that was their reason for acting. But in the bad case, there is no such thing, but because it's an intentional context, it doesn't have to be yet. I'm maybe I'm just missing something. But do you kind of understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah. What is there in, the question I'm after is something like this. What is there in the nature of the explanation of rational action that requires agents to be correct in the reasons for which they act? Somebody can run for the reason that the train is about to leave when it isn't about to leave. Her reason for running is that the train is about to leave. That's the reason for which she is running. It's not why she's running, because, of course, why she is running, that is a non-intentional context. Why she is running is that she thinks the train is about to leave. I'll give you that. But her reason for running is not that she thinks the train is about to leave.
But then
what reasons are not...
What is the train is about to leave in that case then? Because it's not the belief. It's not the fact that it's a nothing. Right?
Yeah. Well, intentional contexts, don't worry about that.
Right.
If it's an intentional context, it's not, the truth of the whole does not require the truth of the part.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
I know there's something odd about, my view. I think that a nothing can explain a something. Now, that's me putting my own view in its attractive form.
Yeah, there's a common... People talk about explanation and causation by absences as sort of something similar to that, maybe. Well,
yes, but the absence itself is pretty much a something in my sense. No, there's no chocolate in the box. Well, the absence of chocolate is a perfectly good reason to go and buy some more.
Right.
It's a something.
Right.
In that
Right.
sense, it's a substance. It's a something. Oh,
Yeah.
well,
I'd have to
I mean,
think about this more, but we could move on.
yeah, okay. I mean, I know my view involves sort of treading delicately through various thickets.
Right. Yeah.
But then, I would maintain the other views are worse.
Right. And part of the problem with the sort of belief or psychological state view is that, the people don't cite their beliefs or psychological states as the reason. They cite the stuff in the
Yeah.
world.
But another problem is that if they did, they'd get the wrong reason.
Right.
But the reason to run is not that you believe that the train is leaving, it's that it's leaving.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah. It seems like there's a lot of tricky obstacles to cover no matter which view you take here.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are, as in all these areas, first of all, you get excited because you think you've got a really big new point, and then you realize that actually it too involves all sorts of intricate sidestepping and admission of complicated contexts that don't quite fit and so on. And you have to sort of struggle on through that and hope that you'll be able to maintain your main view out the other end somehow.
Fair enough. I wanted to move on to something else, and you sort of mentioned this in passing, but you have this view that there are so-called peremptory reasons, and then also these like enticing reasons. And I take it as you using the terms, the peremptory ones are the ones which really count in favor or against some action, but and contribute to an ought, right? Contribute to what you should or shouldn't do, and so on. Whereas enticing reasons, on the other hand, although they're like in some sense count in favor of things, they don't themselves contribute to an ought. Is that the right way to think about it? The difference between those two?
Yeah, it's certainly one of the ways in which So the answer is yes, this one, it is right.
Yeah. And they've gotten some pushback in the literature on that. And it's something I found, I mean, a bit skeptical of it, to be honest. I mean, I take it that maybe the naive view is that, what you ought to do, and on some occasion is just the balance of the reasons for and against that, or determined by the balance of all the reasons you have for and against doing that on that occasion. And if enticers are reasons, then they would contribute to the balance of the reasons you have for performing some action on that occasion. And so really do contribute to the ought. If it all came down to one enticing reason, and it counted in favor of it, we would take that to be a reason to do it, right? It would give you the ought to.
A reason to do it, but a reason to do it, yes.
Yeah, it would be the reason, but also because the balance of reasons is in favor of it, we would say that therefore you ought to do it. I mean, you could say this is, begging the question against the enticer view, but
yes,
I don't know if right. Of course, that's fair. It's just that, well, first of all, do you agree with me that maybe the initial pictures, if maybe wrong, is sort of the intuitive picture that a lot of people have, and so, like, what would we say to maybe to doubt it or motivate this alternative for thinking that there are reasons which are not obligating in some way?
Well, one thing to do is to think about, if like, the difference between the deontic and the non-deontic. The favoring relation does not itself show many signs of being deontic in style. Make some case for doing it. That's what the favor relation is, roughly. Now, if someone said, well, I mean, thereby they make something of a case for its being right. But that is to suppose that the deontic is sort of specially tied to the favoring relation, rather than that there are plenty of contexts, of course, in which the reasons that we consider are in the right-making business. But that doesn't show that the favoring relation itself is deontic in flavor, so that most favored has got to kind of just nudge you over the edge to right or should or ought or must. So I was thinking, well, once you begin to see that the deontic is pretty special, and that it's not obvious that most favoring is the same as making ought or must making, then it looks as if it might be possible for us to think about the favoring relation without spending all the time looking over our shoulders at duty and right and must and ought and should. That was what was in a way going on. It's probably because I'm very, very, very interested in the favoring relation.
I guess maybe what's part of the intuition for me is that's helpful, but maybe what's part of the intuition for me is that I guess I tend to think of all reasons in a way as deontic, but maybe that's
right. Well,
very uncommon.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, look, you've got to remember that before about 1980, nobody had thought about this sort of stuff at all. The best, and the Ross was where I started. I don't know if you've read W.D. Ross, but I hope you have. And up till then, the favoring relation was discussed by moral philosophers who were, of course, all interested in right and duty and things like that. But once we started talking about reasons as the primary, I mean, you don't have to be a reasons first person to be interested in reasons. Then the question, it looked as if it was an open question whether the favoring relation was intrinsically tied to the deontic or not. And I mean, what follows if it's not? Well, I mean, it's not terribly alarming. As it were, there might be the sorts of things I was talking about with enticing reasons, which make a perfectly good case for doing something, but no case at all for making it an ought or a must or a should or a right. And that was just, a possible result in the theory of reasons.
Right. Yeah. Right, because it's not sort of built into the notion of reasons that all of them contribute to these sorts of things, these deontic facts.
Yeah. I mean, counting in favor of that doesn't sound very oughtish. This is a very nice chocolate, and you haven't had a chocolate today, and it's so on and so forth. Not trying to make it a mild duty to eat it, or to say that, well, there's perfectly good reason to eat it, no reason not to eat it, so you ought to eat it. I mean, that seems to be far too heavy a stick to beat someone with who thinks, well, I think I won't actually.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of have that. I do have that sort of thought that it is maybe a very mild ought, and the sort of appropriate reactive attitudes maybe like negligible or nothing, right, and so forth.
Yeah, right.
But
I mean, the idea of a mild ought is itself odd.
Right.
Sounds as if it's an ought without penalty, something like that. But then we never supposed there was going to be a penalty.
Yeah, I mean, there may not be a penalty in the sense that, for the reason that when someone has, say, very slight reason to prefer one thing over another, and yet they don't do the thing that they had slightly more reason to prefer, it's sort of it's a small violation of rationality, so to speak. And so maybe it has little consequences on other things that other people would care about and so on. But all the same, it's like, look, you didn't really do what you had most reason to do. You didn't, and I would just construe that as a sort of failing to do what they ought to have done in a sense. But you want to separate,
right? Yeah, I do really. I mean, in a way, it's an interest in forms of criticism.
And you want to say that, okay, there may be some criticism there, but it's not the sort of on the basis of it being right or wrong. It's maybe like being like silly or something like that.
That's the word I seem to remember using that word in this context. It'd be just plain silly not to do it. And somebody says, "Well, I saw all the attractions, and I just thought I wouldn't actually." You think, well, I mean, why not? But there is criticism. I mean, it's not as if there isn't a blip in someone who thinks in that way. There's some sort of blip. Is a blip a notion? Is that British notion, perhaps?
I think I understand it. Like, it's like something worth taking note here. There's some mistake of some sort.
Yeah. And if you look at yourself, you say, I can't really think why I didn't do it. Really, I just thought I wouldn't. And then we say, well, you should, and I think that's too heavy-handed. And you say, well, think what you missed. And he says, yes, I regret it now. Back to the beginning, the bottom line was, how strong is the link between the favoring relation and deontic concepts in general? That still seems to me a decent question.
Right.
Partly because, we've heard a lot about the deontic, but we haven't, the favoring relation itself is actually quite hard to say anything decent about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's because it's kind of the more basic. You think that's the more basic thing that's going on. Because the deontic is a special case of things that involve favoring relations, but there's favoring relations that apart from that.
Well, remember, the favoring relation is a relation, and the deontic, right and wrong, those aren't relations in the same way.
Right.
I mean, obviously there are relations involved, but the counting in favor of relation seems to have a different metaphysical shape to the being right relation, or the right making relation, or this is me gesturing, but often it's when you get a sense that there's a difference here that has got elided that people haven't quite paid attention to. That's the sort of thing I was up after when I wrote that stuff.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. I think that's a bit helpful. I still not super clear to me, but
Oh,
I think
well,
I understand it a bit better. Fair enough.
Okay, thanks.
The user DE wants to ask something related to the conversation you had at the beginning, near the beginning with Dr. Avi. So,
okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify whether or not I understood what you were saying. So I'm going to try to give a broad outline, and then you can tell me whether I correctly understood you or I misunderstood you. So
okay.
My view about the question that he asked was about the epistemic question that he was asking is just like if you set up the scenario as such, is it the case that you could know whether or not this is morally abhorrent or objectionable or however you want to phrase it, right? And it seems to me like what you were suggesting was that the question was kind of front loaded in terms of the particulars, such that there are no reasons to ultimately favor this state of affairs. And it seems to me like there's some parity that whether or not there's a principle there is sort of irrelevant, because what you're saying is like if we just sort of stipulate at the outset whether or not there are reasons for a particularist, that's just going to be trivial. And if there's a question about like how do you know in this situation whether or not there are reasons, that's sort of no different than asking the type of question for someone who holds to some general principle. How do you know that these are the deontic obligations, or how do you know that this in fact increases utility, et cetera, et cetera. So on the one hand, if you can sort of stipulate out that in the thought experiment that it doesn't increase utility for a utilitarian or whatever, then the answer for the utilitarian will be just as trivial as the answer for the particularist if you just sort of front load it and say that there are no reasons such that you wouldn't find this objectionable. Is that sort of, I kind of rambled there, so I just if you sort of got the general idea of what I was saying, maybe you can recapitulate or
no, and I think okay, but I think that is what I was trying to suggest. That you can describe a situation. You can describe the situation that confronts you in ways that reveal all the reasons present in the case, and you can even go on and say, and there are no other reasons. And then you can be called on to make a judgment about the case. Now, so far, this doesn't favor any particular view in metaethics. Now, if one said, what if you're told that the action is utterly disastrous and has no redeeming feature whatever? Wouldn't you be compelled to judge that the action was wrong? And isn't that at odds with particularism? Because it looks as if in every such case, you'll make the same judgment. Now, I was feeling that I would make such a judgment in every such case, but I don't think that it's any strike against particularism. Because if you tell a particularist that there are no reasons whatever to do an action and many reasons not to do it, then the particularist will say, well, in that case, it must be wrong. And nothing follows from that at all about whether there are any moral principles. That was how I was seeing what was going on in that discussion.
Right, exactly. The idea is that you just specify the sort of balance of all the reasons that you have, and say, and ask, well, what would you do in all those cases? The fact is, what should you do in all those cases? And if what you should do is kind of determined by the specification of the reasons in the outset in the question, then the answer will be the same, right? So in all those cases, you'll do the same thing. But this isn't a general principle that poses any threat to the particulars. That's the kind of point.
No.
So I wasn't asking like if you stipulate that there are no other reasons. I just say that there are not going to be any reasons to favor this to be right or in any permutation on these three normative theories specifically. Now you can say, well, that happens to coincide with not having any reason to do it on these three theories, but then what would account for that what I'm not saying, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that, well, I'm just stipulating that, I'm not like defining the situation to be wrong. Like if that would be trivial. Like, okay, well, yeah, sure. I'm just defining the subset such that there would be no reason to favor it on these three principles specifically.
On these three theories, I thought it was.
Yeah. On these three theories. Oh, I see what you're saying. On these three theories as opposed to these three principles. Is that what?
Well, the three theories were deontology, consequentialism, and something else. I can't remember what the third one was.
Virtue ethics. Yeah.
Virtue ethics. So, I think of all those as orthogonal to the issue about particularism versus generalism.
Mm-hmm. So you would say that? Yeah, go ahead.
What sorts of reasons can there be? Well, the consequentialist says one thing, the deontologist admits the consequentialist reasons normally, but says there are some more. And virtue theory says probably nothing in particular about reasons, but wants to talk about something else. Or it can say something about reasons if it wishes, and some of them do, I know that too. So, but none of that seems to me to have any bite on the issue about particularism and generalism.
So you could say that you could be like a particularist utilitarian. Like could someone be a particularist utilitarian and just say okay, and then they would just say that, well, I'm a particularist utilitarian because the things are right in virtue of utilitarianism, but utilitarianism just happens to particularly end up capturing the right-making features sufficiently of the circumstances. Is that what you would say, or something like along those lines?
Well, I would say that when the utilitarians start to add up the balance of good and bad, they will have to realize the extent to which that is context specific. So it will be true, or that of the options facing you, one of them is the least bad. But you might not be able to get to the decisions to which that one is by simple adding up of units of badness.
Well, I'm not.
It may be that what's bad in one context is not bad in another.
Well, I'm not talking about adding up badness or goodness. I'm talking about adding up utility. So like it'll be some sort of features about mental states, and some will be suffering, some will be well-being. And the utilitarian would want to say like, okay, that which maximizes utility will be good. The more utility, the better. Now my question is just, can you be a particularist and say, I'm a particularist utilitarian? And what I mean by that is that I reject moral principles, and I also think that in all cases that which increases utility is going to be the good, is going to be better than that which does not increase utility.
Well, at the moment I'm thinking that if I was a utilitarian and a particularist, I would say that I'd appeal to the holism of value. That's to say, a consideration which is good in one context, it need not be so good or good at all in another. So that the way in which we move from our knowledge of the good-making features to our knowledge of the value that they make is not regular enough to count as a form of generalism.
So would there be cases where I'm just having the issue I'm having is resolving how like you said that right there, but then say that you can be a particularist utilitarian, because if you're a particularist utilitarian, I just take that to mean that it's like a universal thesis where all things that increase utility increase goodness, and that which is the right thing is that which maximizes utility. But if you're going to say there's different contexts where that may not apply, then I'm just having trouble seeing how you could be a particularist utilitarian if you're going to say there are contexts where that which is good is not is not. It could be that which is good is not what increases utility.
Well, increases utility is normally understood as simply means makes for the most good, doesn't it?
No. Oh no. So there could be like no. So I'm not saying it makes the most good, because they're saying what is the most good. It's a theory about what is the most good, and what is the most good is utility. And by utility, there's different views of
right. Okay.
Yes. There's like preference
Right.
utilitarianism. There's hedonic utilitarianism. So like a utilitarian, let's just say we have a hedonic utilitarian. So a hedonic utilitarian would say that which is the most utility is that which increases these hedon units, and what that is pleasure gain or something. Now, my question to you is: can you be a particularist while being a hedonic utilitarian at the same time, or are those two views at odds on your view?
I don't think they're directly at odds, but they're sort of, the background is definitely at odds, because the particularists will want to say that context makes an enormous difference in these areas. So that I'm enjoying it is, a matter of hedons, but that I'm enjoying it actually makes it worse.
Right. So it seems like, and the same thing would be true of like preferences, like preferons or whatever. Like, right. I know. Like, but you got the point, right? The issue is that it seems hard to say that one is a particularist while committing to one of these normative theories, because they're not just things about saying like that which maximizes the good is maximizing the good. If that was the case, then it's easy for a generalist or a particularist to commit to one of these theories. But if they're saying, well, this is a certain feature of the world, and it universally applies that for maximizing this feature of the world, then that's going to be the good. Well, it seems to be that particularism is just the thing that is the contrary thesis of anything. It's saying, well, actually, what makes them good are the particulars of the context and not this generalizable principle, right?
Yeah, see, again, I'm thinking that's an odd contrast. What makes them good are these and those features, not a generalizable principle. But nobody ever supposed that a generalizable principle makes something good.
Well, whether it makes something good or whether it happens to capture all the goodness, I grant you those are two different questions. So I'll grant you that, yes. So someone can have a view where I'm a utilitarian, I'm a hedonic utilitarian, and what I mean by that is that it's not that the case that what makes these things good are just maximizing the hedons. They're good in virtue of the hedons. What makes these things good, it just so happens to be that this theory accounts for all the things that are good. So it's coextensive with the good. So my theory just happens to capture all of the things, not necessarily because it's in virtue of comporting with the theory. And this relates to my question that I was asking initially, because I think my epistemic question that we were talking about before actually applies in both cases, but Detroit wants to move on. So maybe if we have time at the end, we can go back to that.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I had a couple other questions about like desire, because here we've been talking about reasons for things just in terms of the way things are, maybe in some cases in virtue of the sort of belief someone has. But you've talked about the so-called kind of Humean view, right? That the reasons for things are in some sense some combination of a belief and a desire, or multiples of those things. So when we say, for example, to take, the Helen's reason for leaving was because she believed that she was late, we're leaving out, or maybe leaving implied, the fact that she desired to be at some location more or less on time. And it's those two things together that explain her, or that constitute her reason for having left. Do you think this is wrong? I take it.
I do.
What would you comment? What you say about this?
Well, it's what she believes that's her reason, not her believing
it. Yeah. But we can grant that it's So I maybe shouldn't have built that in there, right? Let's just grant that it's the train, or the fact that she's late, that is her reason for leaving. It's not also the desire that she be at some place at some time that factors into the reason she has for leaving, right? Or is it?
Yeah. I don't think that I want something is a specially privileged reason for me to do it. Sorry, my sentence has gone wrong here. I'm as much influenced by what other people want, which are also reasons for me to act. Second, you've got to listen carefully to these reasons. If I said the reason that I'm going to spend a week in a country spa is that I want to leave my wife, then the thought might be, well, if I spend a week in a country spa, I won't end up wanting to leave my wife. And that's really what's motivating me. Therefore, my reason for going is that I want to leave my wife. And if I spend a weekend in a spa, I won't want that anymore. Now that places the thought, the reason that I want to leave my wife, in a kind of a non-Humean place. It isn't what I want that was my reason, it's that I want it. And there's a distinction between those reasons. Now, the Humeans think that your reasons are not what you want, but your wantings. They're psychological states. Whereas I think that our reasons are what we believe, and sometimes at least what we want. But they're very seldom our believings and our wantings. And those are the things that Humeans feel they have to talk about.
That's an interesting point. Would the Humean not say that in that case, they do have the want? In this case, what is it? It's a sort of a second order. It's a second order desire, right? They really don't want to leave their wife, or maybe they don't want to leave their wife.
To leave him.
Right,
Yeah. See, we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think that very many of our reasons are of the form, I believe this or I want that. They're much more likely to be of the form, if I do this, that will be the result. And the humans will then say, well, you wouldn't do it if you didn't want that result. And I accept that is true. But I maintain nonetheless that your reason for doing it is the result.
Yeah.
Not that you want it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting. Wanting's got to get into any theory of action, and wanting is motivation, essentially.
Wanting will be part of the sort of explanation, like causal explanation for why you acted in a certain way. But you want to say
right,
that,
but it's not
yeah,
your
that's
reason.
not the reason. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it is. You know, people go for sort of training or to be retrained out of certain desires that they have. And presumably you could do the same for beliefs.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to think more about this, but because it's not really an approach that I'd given much thought before. It's interesting. I had a kind of more general question because you said on different occasions, including in that on your appearance with Craig Ferguson, that you kind of have this general view that providing definitions for things is often like not the path to wisdom, or not what we're really in the business of doing, so to speak, as philosophers.
Yeah.
But often, though, it is the path to clarity, or to determining whether some dispute is a substantive one, and so forth. I guess, do you mind commenting on this issue of whether we should be trying to determine the meanings of various expressions and how to define them? What reasons count against doing so, I guess, in your view?
Look, I don't have anything to say against definitions, really. And that was in a special context.
Right.
Though it's, but I do think that defining terms is not a very kind of, itself very estimable and worthwhile. I'm not trying to define the notion of a reason so much as understand it. And I'm not convinced that when I reach that understanding, what I will have got is a definition.
Right.
So there was a time when philosophy was all about meanings, and meanings were supposed to be captured in definitions. So, naturally, you supposedly end up with definitions. So, how can we define Ewing wrote a book called The Definition of Good. Now, I don't believe good could possibly be defined. And I can't see any real attraction in spending one's time trying to work out how to do it and find, actually, as Ewing did, that one couldn't really. But I do think it's worthwhile spending time trying to understand what value is.
Yeah, but doesn't that, like, it seems to me that at the start of the outset of the investigation, there's I don't know, we recognize that we mean something by the term, or that we're picking out some feature of the world, and then trying to determine, well, what other
feature?
Yeah, well, but what other things did that feature satisfy? What other properties does it have? How is it related to other things, and so on? But we still have that first step of like kind of fixing what we're talking about in a way, or
right, absolutely. But then all we're after is not defining the term, as understanding the nature of the thing we're getting at, which is real inquiry.
Right, the stuff you're discovering isn't part of a definition, like new or old.
Yeah. So supposing I said, I've decided I cannot define good, but I'm completely undeterred from the investigation as to which sorts of things are good and why. But I've given up on the definition. I just don't. I don't think I can define the notion of a reason in any helpful way. But in no way is this going to stop me spending the rest of my working life trying to make the best sense of it. What is the goal here? It's understanding, and understanding is, in my view, not commonly provided by definitions.
Yeah, I guess just part of the worry, though, is that if you're developing some theory of or some claims regarding what value is, and someone else says something different, how are we to decide the issue, Right. How do we
Yeah.
to adjudicate?
I mean, that's right. I mean, what a good question. And one thought is there always going to be the same sort of answer? Maybe there isn't, a way of sorting out, a canonical way of sorting out such disagreements. Maybe philosophy is not the search for agreement so much as each of us is searching for a coherent way of expressing the way we see things. Now, I'm not convinced that that we would do that best, expressing the way we see things, by producing a list of definitions.
Yeah, I mean, part of my worry there is that not even just that there may not be a good way to adjudicate the dispute, but that this dispute in the first place might not even be like substantive.
Well, right. I mean, look, I agree with you about that. I've suggested before that I'm not convinced that good can be defined, and I'm not convinced that it needs to be defined. But I would like to understand it better. And you do that partly by mapping it against adjacent notions that are a bit different. So what sorts of differences are there between the good and the right? Not between which things are good and which things are right, but what it is to be good and what it is to be right. Well, we know firstly that many more things can be good than can be right. What sorts of things can't be right? And all that sort of question. This is, it's in virtue, asking such simple questions. You think, well, why can't a stone be right? Well, can it be good? Can a stone be good? Yes, it can. There can be good stone and bad stone. Stones can be ill. You may not know this, but they can. I'm sitting here in a French farmhouse, and I'm looking at some stone that's ill. It's gone blue and it becomes fragile. But obviously, it's not ill in the sense in which somebody who has measles is ill, but it certainly is. Its nature is not at its best.
Yeah, this is something you have written on. I'm trying to recall where, but on the sort of value of artifacts, right?
Yes,
right.
This is true. I did write a piece on that.
I think it was maybe in response to someone else.
Yes, that's right. It was. There was a Dutch university that was running a program on the value of artifacts. It was quite interesting, but I wasn't really able to make much contribution. I was reduced to pretending. I would now say.
Yeah, that's because it's like the example of something being. And part of that was you're exploring this connection between something being a good K or whatever, having normative consequences, to something being a K has normative consequences itself in some way.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, a knife is a good thing to use, and so on. That's what the title of my piece was, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm sort of drawn towards the view that there's no such thing as instrumental value. Partly because both Pritchard and Ross said this. And these are the people who I spent most of my life studying, I think. Being an instrument to good is not a way of being good. It's just being an instrument to good. The value doesn't pass up the tree or down the tree, whichever way it goes.
Yeah. So in other words, the value is just in the things, in the ends, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. What all of it is for.
But then both Pritchard and Ross, go on.
Yeah, but then if someone thinks that the value that they might say that the knife isn't really valuable then. It's only instrumentally valuable. Is that something you find objectionable?
Well, maybe the knife's value depends on its ability to cut, which is not the same as it's being a means to good. One of the things I liked about those two people, Pritchard and Ross, is that they listened very, very carefully to these subtle nuances, which have always been the sorts of things I have liked unearthing.
As a general question, I'd like to ask most of the guests that come on here, and in your view, what is some of the value of philosophy, either for you or for society? In other words, what are some of the reasons for doing philosophy, in your opinion?
Well, clarity. I do think that even when you don't get results, you can achieve greater clarity about the nature of the difficulties that you're trying to understand. So that's one thing. This is not a new view. C.I. Lewis edited a book in the 1960s called Clarity is Not Enough. But that didn't mean to say that clarity isn't itself intrinsically valuable. The other thing is that philosophers are, always saying to themselves, how could this possibly be so? How could there be such a thing as value? For instance. And, but the first thing you had to do was to try and get involved in the question so that you could see that there was a real puzzle here. It was only when I began to see that there could be puzzles that philosophy started making sense to me. Up till then, I thought you just learned stuff up. And then we hit a subject where they said, but actually it doesn't make any sense. Does it? And that's when I got intrigued, and that's what I've always liked most about the activity of philosophy. And this is an unprepared spiel, as you can tell, but nonetheless, something like that is the answer.
Yeah, very good. That makes a lot of sense to me. It reminds me of something that I think John Searle would often say, which is that, the philosopher is often just utterly bewildered by the things that other people just take for granted. Like just ask, how can that? There's meaning. Well, how does that make sense? How does that work? Or there's reasons and so forth. Yeah. Which I find really interesting. A nice way to think about it. Well,
intentions.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
With that, I think we'll draw the questions to a close. Okay. It's been really great having you on here and
thank you. Well, I've enjoyed it too. Thanks for all your questions, and I'm sorry I didn't answer them better than I did.
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody.